Get my 6.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid. What a beautiful, though overcast, still beautiful, late October afternoon here, October night by the time you're seeing the video. Perfect time for one of our final readings from October Nights Part 2, 31 more tales for the Halloween season. And yes, you've probably noticed I have my favorite coat back on, and not just because it's a bit chilly today, but for another reason. But because once again, the zipper actually works. Look. See that? For the last 2 years, I guess I've been wearing this coat regularly because I like it so much, but without the zipper working. It worked for years after I bought it, but then it just stopped working. It was amazing how observant those of you who watch these videos are, because people would often say, when are you going to get that zipper fixed? Or when are you going to get a coat that doesn't have a broken zipper? Why don't you throw that thing away? Because this is the most comfortable coat I think I've ever had in my life. And I got it at a thrift store for $7. I want to say thank you and give a special shout out to Sharon Downs, who allowed me to send her this coat, and for free of charge, she put a new zipper on it. That's something she does. Seamstress, I guess you might say, and she sent it back to me. And she also made me a tie, a very patriotic red, white, and blue American flag type tie. I don't wear ties often. I think I've worn a tie twice in the last 15 years, but I'm going to make a special occasion to wear that tie. It's a beautiful tie, so thank you, Sharon. There truly are some wonderful people out there in the world. Most people are good. Most of them are good. Unfortunately, I work in an industry where I could come on here and tell you about all the wonderful people I come across daily, and it would put me out of business. That's sad. Social media, truly the gutter of the internet. You got to come talk about the drama and talk about the 1 out of 100 that's an asshole if you want to stay in business. It's sad. But Sharon Downs is not one of those a-holes. She is a wonderful person, like most of you who watch. Speaking of a wonderful person, somebody who submitted several stories to us as time has gone on, and who was the winner of today's drawing. And a note on that, watch out for the scammers, guys. If you win these random drawings we're doing daily through the Day of the Dead, November 1, I will announce it here on the channel, and I might contact you by way of the very same email address you emailed your story to about your paranormal experience. I'm not going to reply to a comment you leave on the channel and say, hey, contact me at this Instagram account above. We caught a scammer doing that today, and I went through and reported them and banned them, but they come through all the time. So watch those. Do not reply to that. If it's not an email directly from the email that you sent your story to, it's not from me. Okay, but today's winner is Tina Griffer. And Tina requested specifically this. This is a set. These guys are all individual. This is the haunted house set I created, creepy graveyard set. I'm trying to get them all in here. It's a 7-piece set I make with my saws and my acrylic paints and stuff in my wood shop. Haunted house, tombstone, candy corn, and then these guys. Tina, if you're watching, we actually mailed your set to you this morning in the outgoing mail with all of our Etsy sales that we shipped out today. These are available on Etsy, but you can be part of the raffle if you submit your story to the email address. A lot of you have said, hey, I think you missed this story. No, we didn't. There's just so many stories coming in. Look for True Hauntings Volume 2 to be released like in the first week of November. You guys are sending in so many stories. And this has been so much fun. And again, the email address is crazylake@mail.com. And you can go through our Etsy store, and any of the handmade home decorations you see in there that I've made in the wood shop, if you want it, you say, hey, if I win, give me that. I don't care if it's one of the $9.99 ones or $49.99 ones. We'll send it to you. This is what Tina requested. $39.99, I think, for that set. This has been so much fun. I've tossed around the idea of maybe continuing this. Not every day, because I need a break, you need a break. But maybe a couple days a week, reading some of these really creepy, awesome stories that our viewers are submitting, because some of them are so cringeworthy. When Halloween's over, spook time doesn't end. We've got to have our ghost stories and our paranormal stories throughout the year, right? So I was back in the wood shop this morning, and I have begun creating Christmas ornament type stuff and decorations. I made this today. You've probably seen these. These are these little Christmas countdown block sets. Simple to make, and I make all this. I cut them from 1 by 1 by 8 feet long pine boards I get at Lowe's, and then of course paint them. But with these numbers, you can count down from 90 days down. It's literally, as of this recording, 58 days until Christmas. So tomorrow you'd wake up, put this on your desk, put it on your mantle, put it on a bookshelf. Then of course the next day you'd keep counting down all the way down until Christmas. So these are now available in our Etsy store. The link's in the description box below. But I'm thinking like in November, once Halloween is behind us, keep doing this and allow you to be eligible to win Christmas type stuff. So let me know your thoughts on that in the comment section. And remember, I'm not going to try to send you to Instagram or give you a phone number or something like that in the reply section, okay? So there's that. And now, the main reason you're here, wow, I yabbed on and on for 6.5 minutes yesterday before I finally got to the story. Let's get to the story, okay? Wow, I didn't even have the bookmark properly. Here I thought I was prepared. I just woke up from a nap, slept for about 45 minutes, still have my coffee. I have loaded, hauled, split, and almost stacked all of 6 truckloads of firewood just in the last 2 days. So, a little bit tired. This, after, of course, not missing a single morning run. But today is October 28th. Story called I Told You So. Originally titled Daffodils and Strawberry Hill. And every time I think of this story, or read it in this case, I remember that old country music song. And if you listen to country music in the first early part of the century, you probably will think of it. Strawberry wine. Like, strawberry wine, 17. What was it? Hot July moon saw everything. You remember that song? I can't remember the singer. A beautiful female country singer. On with the story. The events I'm about to relate did not take place in October, though you'll no doubt agree after hearing of these events that this story is definitely fitting to be part of a collection of stories centered around Halloween. They happened in March. Actually, the events occurred during several different marches over a period of several different years until the events stopped. The final march during which the events associated with this story took place was last March. I'd gotten up in the middle of a particularly cold night to put another log on the fire in the wood stove and to use the restroom. I'd done both, and as I turned to leave the bathroom and go back to bed, she was there, standing just outside the doorway. I told you so, is all she said. And then, as mysteriously as she'd appeared, she'd vanished. She was not my wife, who was still in bed sleeping at the time. It was Angela. I went back to bed, still half asleep, thinking it had only been a dream. I woke up the next morning, and after carrying out my typical morning routine of coffee, quiet time, meditation, and breakfast, I went to my office upstairs and sat down at my desk. I peered out the window and into our front yard, and there, for the first time that year, I saw them. Daffodils. They were in bloom now, and I remembered the apparition from the night before, and I remembered Angela, and I now realized it had not been a dream. I will now relate the entire story. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was about 7 years old the morning I walked into the church in the small town I grew up in. Old Lady Buxton was sitting toward the front of the church crying, and everyone else from the congregation who'd already arrived for church service that day were sitting with her, consoling her. Everyone else except the kids, of course. They were all sitting in the back, trying not to make too much noise, just like every Sunday. I joined them, and once I got there, I pulled out the Matchbox cars I'd sneaked into church to help me pass the most boring, grueling 2 hours of my week. Will you marry me? It was Angela, one of the little girls I'd attended church with, gone to school with, and had known basically my whole life. She had asked me this question while extending a handful of daffodils she'd apparently plucked from the yard in front of the church before coming in. Angela was always a sweetheart, but I was more concerned with my Matchbox cars at the time. What seven-year-old little boy wouldn't be? I took the flowers, smelled them, and then I handed them back to her and I said, I don't want to marry you, but I'll always be your friend. She put her head down and mumbled, can't blame me for trying. I handed her one of my Matchbox cars and said, cheer up. And then we continued playing as if the proposal and the rejection had never occurred. We'd been playing with our cars and the other toys the other kids had brought in for a few minutes when I noticed that Angela had stopped playing. I looked over at her and she was gazing toward Mrs. Buxton and the crowd around her. What is it? I asked. Old man Buxton, she said. He just walked in and sat down beside old woman Buxton, and she's acting like he's not even there. All of them are. I followed Angela's gaze with my eyes. I did not see Mr. Buxton, and I told Angela so. How can you not see him, she said. He's right there. I looked again, and as before, I could not see him. The preacher started his god-awful long sermon just a minute or two later, and he started by saying that he was sorry to state that we'd lost a member of our congregation, as just the night before, old man Buxton had died. I looked over at Angela. She had not heard the preacher because she'd been too caught up in building a ramp of sorts, using the hymnal books from the rack on the back of the pew in front of us, and rolling the Matchbox car I'd given her to play with down the ramp. I looked over at Mrs. Buxton and the crowd around her again, and old man Buxton was not there. Fast forward 15 years or so. I was attending a small state college in Appalachia. It turns out that Angela was attending the same college. I guess I'd known this for the previous few years that we'd both been attending said college, but I hadn't fully acknowledged this fact until Angela and I would end up working on the student paper staff together. I as a sports writer and sports editor, and she as a columnist and a junior editor for the paper senior year. Well, her senior year and my second senior year. I had a few senior years. How Angela had grown. Though we continued to associate with each other to a degree throughout our school years before college, we'd always been part of different cliques. I'd been a jock type, excelling in sports. She had been a nerdy girl, excelling in academics. Angela and I became not so much reacquainted with each other working on the college paper together, as we'd never really fallen out of touch with each other. We'd become more acquainted, because for the first time since those early years in church, we were in close contact with each other on a more regular basis. I lived in a ratty apartment off campus, and Angela lived in the dorms. She would come down and hang out with me at the apartment sometimes, and we'd always go across the street to the convenience store and buy a bottle of Boones Farm Strawberry Hill wine. See why that song comes to my mind? At least that's what they call it, wine. Any true wine drinker would tell you that it is an insult to their beverage of choice, but hey, it was wet and it had alcohol in it and it was cheap. We were college students, remember? But most importantly, we bought it regularly because it was Angela's favorite. One afternoon in March, Angela and I were sitting in my backyard drinking a bottle of Strawberry Hill and talking about the paper. At least she was talking about the paper. I wasn't listening to a word she was saying, rather I was focusing on how she looked while she was saying them. Angela had transformed from that marginally cute little church girl nerd into one hell of an absolutely beautiful young woman. I'd noticed that the daffodils were up, so I said, "Excuse me a second." And I walked to the edge of the yard and I picked a few. I returned, sat down, and I handed them to Angela and I said, "Want to pretend we're married?" She took the flowers, smelled them, and then handed them back to me and said, "I don't want to pretend we're married, but I'll always be your friend." I took the flowers and I put my head down and mumbled, "Can't blame me for trying." She handed me the bottle of Strawberry Hill and said, "Cheer up." And then we continued drinking and talking as if the proposal and the rejection had never occurred. Our small school had an annual publication in which student writers would have their works of poetry, prose, and other short fiction stories published. Angela got several of her works published every year, and one of them was usually chosen to be the featured piece. I, on the other hand, never got published. Guys, this is true. I never got published in the publication, even though I submitted several works to it every year. That year, Angela's last year in school, I asked the editor why I was never published in the annual. He told me, true story, "Look, stick with sports or nonfiction. You're just not a good writer. Your stories don't make any sense. They're not believable. There is no way anyone will ever read anything you ever write. You're just not any good." I just wrote his comments off as coming from someone who didn't like me. I wasn't a typical literature geek. I did not fit the mold. And the English lit professor, who was the faculty advisor for the annual, well, she just didn't like me either. At least that's what I told myself. I'd actually had her for class at some point, and she kicked me out for excessive absences and gave me an F. Sounds like Aiden in a story from a few days back. Shooter's Manifesto, no? You see, her class was boring, and I wouldn't go unless there was a test, and when I went and took the test, I would always get an A, and it pissed her off. So the only way she could finally get rid of me and fail me was to do so due to my absences. And when I'd gone to her and begged her to allow me back into the class, promising her I'd go to class, even though it was more boring than those extended church services I used to sit through when I'd been a little kid, true story, she only became more angry toward me. She told me, much like the student editor, that I was, quote, I was not a good writer. Give up. No one will ever read your work. If you actually think you'll be able to support yourself from writing someday, you're delusional. I never got published in that annual, despite spending 2 more years at that little state college and submitting works of fiction I'd written both of those years. But fortunately, I never took the advice from the student editor or the faculty advisor either. And I'll point out at this time that I've taken the high road here, at least on my 5th round of edits on this work before submitting it to my editor, and I have removed the 2 words that were originally written here. They were "fuck them," in case you're curious. It always pays to just take the high road. How do you do it? I asked Angela one evening while we were hanging out and drinking a bottle of, you guessed it, Boones Farm Strawberry Hill. How do you write so good? You mean well, she said, laughing, showing off her lit geek prowess. She collected herself and said, have you ever noticed how real my stories seem? Yeah, I said. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, I know they're all about the paranormal and the supernatural, but when you read them, it's as if that stuff is 100% real. How do you do that? You never believe me if I told you, she said. Try me, I said. I was desperate. I truly loved writing, and delusional or not, I wanted to do it full time. I have a third eye, Angela said, deadpan. You're joking, right? I said. Not at all, she said. You're nuts. There's no way that crap is real. Like you're talking about seeing the future and all that? Seeing dead people everywhere? No way. I told you that you wouldn't believe me, she said. Okay, I said, prove it. Angela put her head down, thinking. Okay, she said. You remember when we were kids, that time in church, when I said I saw Mr. Buxton come in to console his widow the morning after he died? Yeah, I said, but I just figured you were pranking me. I assumed that you and your family had already gotten word of his death. We hadn't, she said, and it wasn't a prank. It was real. That was one of the first times it happened. I'd later simply learned not to relay what I was seeing to others because I didn't want to get locked up in the nut house or forcefully medicated in the least. I'm not buying it, I said. You're very convincing, that's all. Angela put her head down again, thinking. I've got it, she said. I know how I can prove it to you. How? I said. Just make sure to outlive me, and when I die, I'll come back and I'll tell you I told you so. With that, she jumped up, laughing, and turned around and said to me, remember, just don't die, and I'll prove it to you. And then she ran off. She had a date with a man who she'd go on to marry and have 2 children with before ending up getting divorced in her mid-30s, like so many other people who would go on to marry college sweethearts, only to get divorced in their mid-30s. That was one of the last times I saw Angela, as she would graduate only weeks later. She nor I went back to our small Appalachistanian hometown much, and we never ran into each other when we did. So her graduation, at which we never even spoke to each other with all the people and the pomp and circumstance, etc., would be the last time I would ever see her. Until that night in March of last year, as of this writing, when I saw her standing just outside my bathroom door in the middle of the night she'd come to say, I told you so. After staring out my office window down at the daffodils in the front yard and having remembered all of these things from years ago, I decided to do a quick internet search for my old friend. I'm not a Facebooker, so I went straight to Google. I put in her name, at least as last I knew it to be after she'd gotten married, and I put in the name of the small town back in Appalachistan where I'd known her to reside, and that's how I found it. Her obituary. Angela had died only the week before. The end. So guys, we only have 2 stories left. I've read 28 stories so far, and I want to thank each and every one of you who have been here for all of them especially, or at least some of them. And again, if you've missed some, we did create a playlist here on the channel. Please continue to submit your true stories of real experiences with the paranormal to the email address, crazylake@mail.com. Some people may have been recognizing parts of their personas or their personalities or their lives in some of these stories over the last 28 days. And I've talked about this before. As a writer, you often will have people that you know come to you and say, that story was about me, wasn't it? Or that one character in that one book you wrote, that was me, wasn't it? In the past, I would say no, maybe a little bit, because you do draw from experiences and from people you run into. This time around, I would say yes, absolutely. And what I will also say is that you better hope you're not one of them. Here in a couple of days on Halloween night, you're going to find out exactly what I mean by that. But we got another story to go before then. I'll see you tomorrow night for that one.